years later and just see the similar faces, same faces, people I know who are still progressing and doing some amazing work, and then see this whole family just grow, and what an institution AMC is here in Detroit. So congratulations to everybody, to Jenny, and to, I'm so happy. So honored. I think I should just show you the video if you don't know. Well, actually, that's not true. I'll start off that I'm a journalist and I'm a comedian. So I do stand-up, and that is my live interaction. And I want to talk a little bit about how I've used sort of a foot in semi-mainstream media to try and pry it open to have more radical discussions, and specifically talk about, systemic oppression and, gender, race, sexuality, class, and all the things that we need to in order to stop this syphilitic dream of a Trump administration that we're living in. So the point is, I started as an independent journalist in New York. I grew up sort of in the anti-war movement, and all the fallout of 9/11 and the Iraq War and Afghanistan wars. And then I moved to Buenos Aires, Argentina, and was an independent journalist there, and started stand-up comedy at the same time. Did stand-up in Spanish, English, and it was really fun. Also started a dinky YouTube channel out of my living room. And it was called Laugh Not to Cry, and 5 years later I can now say I have a little less dinky of a YouTube channel. So that's been my progression. No, I moved back to the Bay. I'm from the Bay originally, San Francisco Bay Area, and started AJ Plus, which is the new online digital channel of Al Jazeera Media Network. And yeah, you've heard of it. Thank you. And so from there, I've always been a fan of Jazeera. I've always been a fan of the international reporting that they've done. I think they sort of, I think in a lot of ways, pioneer the idea that we should be hearing about Latin American and Middle Eastern and African affairs from people of those regions, which somehow in journalism is a hard one. And so being able to launch AJ Plus was such a privilege, and being able to break down some of these concepts that, as for journalists and storytellers in the room, you know that, especially when it comes to current affairs and analysis, I mean, it's always left to generally, middle-aged white men. And I think having the opportunity to make web content that was also like 10 New York Times articles in, something we're not gonna read, and put it into 3 minutes was awesome and challenging, and I'll get into the pitfalls of social media a little bit later. But 3 years into AJ Plus and being a host and a producer and with them, I launched a news comedy show, trying to be, I like to say that we're like a more subversive Last Week Tonight without HBO money. And it's a weekly show, about 10 minutes long, and trying to delve into some deep topics beyond the headlines, right? And kind of give people the background, but also have some, sugar to go with the medicine, as they say. So you're gonna have to show me how to use this.
Here. I think we need a tech person.
Please, thank you. So you might have recognized a few of these videos, but adelante. Thanks.
Hey Jen, I really like your hair.
Thanks, Becky.
I think the curls are awesome. Black hair's the best.
Can you not do that? It's kind of inappropriate.
What? Why?
Well, it's kind of racist.
You're probably wondering what went wrong in this workplace interaction between Becky and Jen. Unless you have a keen understanding of racial discrimination in today's workforce, you probably didn't notice that something very offensive has taken place. Jen called Becky the R word, causing Becky to feel shame and sadness. How can we avoid situations like this? I
identity politics, the most odious of crimes for conservatives, using your identity to influence your political perspective, as Sean Hannity explains.
We need to get rid of identity politics.
I'm with you.
Period. We don't believe in identity politics. I'm not a big believer in identity politics, Jorge.
Matter of fact, if I could just call you George, I would feel a lot more comfortable. And yet it just so happens that before giving an opinion, Hannity often likes to remind viewers of his identity.
I'm a Christian. I believe in redemption. As a Christian who believes in the Judeo-Christian ethic, I'm a Christian Catholic conservative is how I identify myself.
Oh yeah, it's okay when Hannity plays identity politics because he's a Christian, the one true valid identity. Identity politics, it's okay when the right identity does it. So for a guy that talks a big game about not wasting money on war, Trump increased the military budget by $94 billion. And now with a new national security advisor who believes in a first strike approach with North Korea and Iran, a deeply Islamophobic nominee for Secretary of State, and the woman who may have had a role in overseas torture programs nominated as CIA director, one has to wonder if the isolationist rhetoric, like pretty much everything else about this presidency, is maybe also a giant crock of shit. Bolton, Pompeo, and Haspel are like Cheney, Rumsfeld, and Ashcroft understudies. They might not have been on the War on Terror playbill, but they know every line. Known unknowns, unknown knowns, I love ya, George W. I swear there are WMDs. What's up, YouTube? It's me, Trot.
And me, your boy, Sky.
Your favorite enemies of the state, back here with another episode of Weapons of Mass Distraction. Consumer reviews for anti-capitalists. So as a woman, how can it possibly make sense to vote for a party that makes it harder for you to get fair pay and harder to raise, feed, and get health care and housing for your family? I just don't understand how anyone could possibly believe that by the light of Ivanka Trump's $4,200 diamond ring. I get it. I get it. I get it. Just. What powerful Republican women suffer from has nothing to do with gender at all. It just has to do with what ails every powerful Republican: classism. Could it be that these women buy into the Republican small government trickle-down economic ideology because they've had it good? They rail about handouts, but they've had things handed to them. They talk about entitlements, but what about the entitlement it takes to be a woman who inherited all her wealth from a guy who inherited all his wealth and turn around and write a book called Women Who Work? More like women who say, "Daddy, please." Now, as our president may end up being taken down by a porn star. Is getting stormy. Can I just say that Trump being undone by his favorite vice is such a perfect example of poetic justice that I feel like Oompa Loompas are gonna roll him out of the Oval Office. What do you get when you cheat on your wife? That was a little sample of Newsbroke. So yeah, that's a show, Newsbroke, that we launched 2 years ago, and trying to, I think, unpack these bigger concepts that are in the zeitgeist. You know, identity politics was one, which was such a big thing after the 2016 election, and sort of turning that around and saying, I think it's Trump and the alt-right that have been using the white identity as the biggest, you know, leverage point to dog whistle to their base. So I think it's been good and bad. Newsbroke is now done, and it's over, unfortunately. But it's been as sort of trying to push the boundaries of a more mainstream news organization like Al Jazeera, trying to basically do comedy for Al Jazeera Media Network, which is incredibly difficult. But great. We've I think I would say that in terms of trying to create our own radical spaces and trying to kind of DIY it, which I think is the future and of how transformative cultural work is going to be done. I would say that there are outlets within mainstream news and media organizations that can be pried open. And that I think it's important to keep on trying to do that on our terms and on your terms. I think that representation for sure is important, absolutely, like being able to, but I agree with you, Ricardo, like being able to push beyond that and actually set the agenda. And it's not just the people who are on screen, but also the writers and the comedians and the producers and the directors and all of that. And so I think we're in a really interesting moment. And so for me personally, having sort of one foot in and one foot out of that mainstream culture, it's been, I've learned a lot, but I also feel like we have to keep pushing, we have to do both, right? We have to kind of have like, again, like the Democratic Party, like sort of outside, inside strategy. And I guess the last thing I'll say around what I've done with AJ Plus and Newsbroke is that what's bullshit about it is that it is so dependent on social media, right? And that all of the followers and the people that we've gotten has been thanks to, you know, Facebook's algorithm, and that's been a blessing and a curse. And so many of the people who recognize my work and recognize Newsbroke and AJ Plus are thanks to the fact that we're more connected than ever. And it's been wonderful to hear some feedback and wonderful to get recognized always by the most always like young social workers of color and just educators who use the videos, and that's wonderful. At the same time, we know now that Facebook is not in our interests, and they are not looking out for us. They are not going to be there for us. And so, in fact, they're actively working, you know, to psychograph us, which is very, very scary. And I want to say I've never psychographed any of you, okay? Just wanting you to know if you've ever watched my videos. Just if you're on my mailing list, then I totally. So I think, again, with this inside-outside strategy, it's important to keep in mind that the social media doesn't always have our best interests at heart. And it's not always about views, right? As someone who, we had 50,000, you know, subscribers on YouTube, which was not enough, actually. And, you know, 200 or 300,000 on Facebook Watch, which, again, was good. But, like, still, we work for media institutions that sometimes, you know, if it's not breaking 10 million, you know, you don't exist. And I think we have to, in a culture of constant likes and how many and this and that, we have to push back against that and understand that it is really about, quality over quantity. At least that's what I tell myself every day. No. And then I just want to say that I think that one of the hard pieces with breaking into mainstream spaces and having more radical messaging, and by radical, all I mean is like talking about capitalism, you know, like, not that radical, but what's really hard, right, because that is, the C word is, you know, the capitalism word is way worse than the other C word nowadays, good and bad, but because you take someone like Tomi Lahren and you see the way that someone on the right can say the most outlandish thing, and they get supported, they bubble to the top, because both for right-wing media and the right in general, but also for, you know, liberal centrist media, like that is actually a safer message. It's safer to say, let's build a wall, let's deport and separate families from their children. It's not safe to say, let's abolish capitalism, you know? It's not safe to say, let's have socialist alternatives. It's not like, and so those messages, you could be the most extreme on the left. And actually have a plan to get there, right? Actually have an ideology. You can be building in communities, and your message is not going to be floating to the top. You're not going to get those investors because you're ultimately, it's a subversive voice. So I think we're struggling in a time of media where we don't have, especially in news, a countervailing Fox, right? And MSNBC is not it. as my, I love Maddow for some things, but but like, she's good on Russia, too good on Russia. But I think they're extremists who have a huge mouthpiece, and so what about us? And I think that's something I've tried to do and something I hope to continue to do, and I think again with that inside-outside radical cultural strategy, we can absolutely get there. I'm gonna finish. I'm done. Thank you guys.
So, as you can see, we have an amazing panel of incredible. I think in thinking about this panel, it was so exciting just to think about how thoughtful everybody's work is and how it incorporates humor and all the layers that are happening at the same time, and it's incredible. Building off what you were just talking about, a question to us all about how do we measure our impact of our work? Because, obviously the time is now more than ever, it's always makes sense. What do we do? How do we measure impact of our work if it's not just likes, it's not just shares, as people creating art in the world? Yeah, anyone, thoughts?
Yeah, I would start by saying, when I think about Brujos and the Hoodwazi and most of my projects, they're failures, right? Brujos did not get HBO knocking on its door, can we give you a contract, right? They're failures by these conventional notions. The Hoodwazi does not have 1 million, people tuning in on our live stream every other week. But to me, when I think about social movements, right, whether it's the civil rights movement or the Black liberation movement or the docu-queer movement, they're also failures, right? They haven't changed the system completely. They haven't revolted, right? They haven't overthrown capitalism. And maybe part of the problem is how we think of revolution is as an event, right? And so then if we're looking for this event of all of a sudden, we get the modes of production or however we're defining it, we're never going to be successful. And we're always then only able to measure, we're always then, so we have to find new ways to measure what success is then. And so for me, when my work fails, I'm like, yes, bitches, here we go, right? Because it then becomes about really finding out what the work is doing. Right, so I know there's not a week that goes by where I don't get a message in my inbox or someone doesn't walk up to me on the street and tell me what Brujos has done for them. Or even when we were debating whether or not after the first year of putting on, this exhausting show, the Hoodwazi, because it's bi-weekly, and we were like, maybe we will just do 1 year. Within the 1 month we were off, the amount of people that were like, when is the show coming back? This show has changed my life. And so for me, it's about developing the metrics of success and the ways to measure success that fit the thing, not this uniform bullshit of quantity, of likes and things like that. And so I'm always like, is the shit that you're making creating radical effect? Mm-hmm. I'm a radical artist, and I know that I've intervened in young people's lives to inspire them to want to make radical change. And I hope my work is doing the same. And I think what if we measured it like that? How many concentric circles of influence have you got for people to be like, yes, let's take this shit down?
Yeah. Others?
Yeah, I'll just say I think that I think it absolutely is about quality, and I don't think the internet is lost completely, and I think you probably have seen that in some of the people who do engage and who watch the live stream and who are commenting in these sort of, as I call them, repeat offenders of your base. And I think you can manage a YouTube channel to have constructive debate. I know that sounds crazy, but you can create safe spaces online, and I absolutely think we need to be more, especially the Allied Media Conference. If anyone, those brains are in the room who are going to create those new spaces. so we can finally leave Facebook forever. I say that as someone who's like totally relied on Facebook for a lot of what Newsbroke has done. But I think it is about the people who tell me that they use white fragility in their classrooms, you know, and that they have used our piece breaking down why the rich hate unions and how they've union busted over the last 50 years and like what's going on right now with the Supreme Court decision that's coming down the pike. Or Sesta and Fasta, people had no idea that this had even happened. And sex workers saying thank you for actually addressing it. And so I think it's absolutely like, I feel like it definitely has impact. But I think that our measurements, all three of you are actually, and me too, but less, you know, I don't, stand-up I think is a different animal, but I think the future for me for comedy, and specifically as someone who does like a monologue show, my pitch to a lot of networks has been, you know, let's basically take what the Yes Men do and what you guys do, right? This actual like, you know, disruption, live, you know, street theater, disruptive actions that are fucking hilarious and creative. And let's take the desk away from these monologue shows. Let's like, I want to see HBO put their money behind, I want to see Netflix put their money behind, you know, a comedian or a John Oliver who's actually gonna like take it to the streets. To, you know, put it behind Una Osato. Like I want to see that. You know, I'm serious, you know, and like I think they are scared. Hollywood is scared, very scared, and we're gonna have to keep on pushing and fighting on these grounds and saying there is appetite for that. Like we don't want to just see the safe comic behind a desk making jokes about, you know, and then saying #resistance. No, like I want to see you do it, you know. I want to see you take like, you know, point the finger at the powerful rather than just sort of like nip around their heels. And so I hope to see, I don't know, now I'm just sort of going off.
Yeah, no, all of us were, yeah.
But and I think you guys are the ones at the forefront, and I think some of the work that you have put out here, that's where it's going. That's where we're headed. Because we can't trust Zuckerberg, and I want to, you know, but that haircut, dude, like just the hair. It's just the hair.
It's interesting, like doing me and my sister Michi Osato. I don't know if I shouted her out. She's amazing, collaborator genius. She's right there. We make community, like, you know, we have like, we're so excited to pack you know, a bar of like 60 people, and because we are on no budget and we pay the performers ourselves, and we're like, wow, we broke even. We're not, like, this is amazing. And then like, you know, like put all our effort into these things each month, and then they like nourish us, and then like we'll just go on Facebook and be like, oh wait, we're nothing, like this constant, the internet and then real life, and social media like terrifies me, but I know that I have to be in it, sort of. So I can like have these highs of like being like with community and be like, this is why we're doing it. And then I've had to start like making my own checklist of like standards of what is it that I'm doing. Okay, I brought community together. Okay, that's important. We had meaningful connections. We got to release emotions. So like we like tried to make our own rubric of what success is. And it feels hard because like the magnitude of violence is so large in the world, and to be like, okay, 60 people had a really meaningful night. Okay, that's important. And yeah, I don't know. And yes, and it is.
And 60 people were thoroughly.
No, it like goes back. It is important. Like all of our interactions are so important.
But also just
then like I'm by my like phone and I'm like, no, nothing's important. Scroll. Anyone have that experience? That's why we come to be with each other at the Allied Media Conference.
I was also gonna say, and then they just got together to play and had fun, and at a time, like I'm like trying to, you know, sort of latch onto the beast and kind of bite off its back and like take it down, versus creating like you do with Compost Bin, a space that is pure, that it is of play, that obviously has a political critique and everything, but it is, you walk away feeling healthier. You walk away feeling more nourished. And having that space of play is so critical.
If you want to, I was going to ask how to.
I hate units of measurement.
Yeah, hate units of measurement.
I hate them.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to throw another question in the mix, but I'm wondering, like, how do you all navigate this world, the online world, and because we're making media, we're making content, like all this stuff, and how do you like live in the world as how do you negotiate the balance of taking care of yourselves as artists, outputting in the world, and the ebbs and flow of being alive? Tell me the answer. The discomfort. Or not, or we can go on to another question. Or
We're barely hanging on, clearly. We're like, I don't know.
Yesterday.
would you say it again?
I said I partied so hard yesterday.
Yes.
Oh, I don't have this thing on.
Oh.
Between her legs.
Welcome.
I said I partied so hard yesterday, it's hard to focus. That's why I had to read from a piece of paper.
Partying hard, yeah.
Yes.
And
The DJ was amazing.
DJs give us life. Thank you, DJs.
How do you do it, Una?
Or maybe the audience has some
Yes,
questions.
maybe that's an audience question. Okay. Should we, do we have any, I mean, I have tons of questions. Do we want to hear some audience?
Sure.
Yes, sorry. So much talking at you. Now be with us. Yay.
I think I wanted to, you were going to ask a question about comedy, right?
Okay, are there people who have thoughts, questions? How do you deal in the world? Yeah, I see you, Wavy. Yeah, and I'll repeat it again. Oh. I'm hearing a lot of talk about Latinx identity. Okay, here comes the mic.
Hello? Hello?
Hi.
Can you hear me? Okay. Is it loud? Oh, shit. Okay, sorry. So I'm hearing talk about Latinx identity, but it's sounding like Latinx as a racial identity of being people of color, which is not. So I just want to know, like, how you're addressing, like, this is open for the panel, of, like, racial identity and censoring Black and Indigenous folks of Latinx descent.
Wait, what?
Say that last part again. We missed that
Okay.
last part. Thank you.
Sorry. So I just want to know how you're addressing Latinx white supremacy in your work, because Latinx is ethnicity and not a racial identity. And I think that's like under-acknowledged, especially in the US, because just a lot of history there. But yeah, so I just want to, know how.
I do have a work that does address that. Maybe I could talk about it like super briefly. But I have a work that's, I didn't bring a slide for it, but I made a work called Nude Laughing. And basically what the work is it sort of is a exploration about the way in which Latinidad is entangled in whiteness, and the way that it's defined against whiteness, with whiteness, through whiteness. And so the work, I wish I had, it's so boring to talk about it, it's so weird and wild. Anyway, I usually do the work in museums. It's museum site specific, because I'm also addressing the whiteness in the museums and nudity, the types of nudity that are in museum spaces. And basically what I do is I embody white womanhood. So the way that looks for me, because I'm shady, is feeling a lot of pleasure, like extreme pleasure. So what I did is I taught myself to do laughing basically for 30 to 40 minutes, an endurance-based practice of laughing, to try to feel the embodiment of white joy. And And what I do is I walk around the museum collection and I laugh. I walk on the perimeter. Is that me? That's what happens when you talk about whiteness.
Yep.
So what I do is I laugh around the perimeter of the museum until it's unbearable to feel the joy. And I enter into this mesh nylon cocoon that has all this different stuff that I imagine the things that it represent, like an imagined white womanhood, and I sort of entangle myself and mix myself, having sort of like a sexual thing with all the things inside this nylon cocoon, and then I come out. So I think in my work I am addressing it, at least that, in a more abstract way. But yeah, so I would say that sort of addresses that in a way, in some ways.
Yeah, I vehemently disagree with this discourse that Latinx is not a racial identity. And I think it's important to talk about, right? Because part of yes, we know the world is anti-black, yes, we know the world is misogynist, and this permeates, racial groups, and anyone that's brown and that grew up Latino knows that you have like a racist grandmother or uncle or several of them, right? But the idea, though, that Latinx is not a racial identity is really problematic because what it's relying on are these certain definitions of race that are tied to Western science and Western biology that themselves, right? So it only reifies that notion of race. What we know is that race is a social construction, right? That ends up having real impacts on our lives. So there's someone like Ruth Wilson Gilmore, the black abolitionist, that says race is group differentiation to expose populations to premature death. And right now, when there are little brown kids that are in tent cities, incarcerated, and their families are being separated, they're separated as Latinos. They're targeted as Latinos. They are exposed to premature death as Latinos. So I think it's really important that when we talk about these things, that are super important conversations to have, so that we can actually do the real solidarity work. We don't do it on the terms and in the grammar that have been handed down for 500 years from colonialism, or in the disciplines that have actually been used to kill us, like science and biology and physiology and the Enlightenment. So again, right, like, it's important to kind of like interrogate those categories of analysis, because the reality is people are getting killed and being defined as Latino. People are getting killed and being defined under notions of blackness. People are being killed and defined as women, or as queers, or as Muslims. And so I think, again, right, it depends on how we're defining and understanding those things. And I think for so long, one of the things that, looking in Chicago and doing kind of work at the intersection of black precarity and brown precarity, specifically Mexican precarity, because Mexicans are 80% of Latinos in Chicago, and Latinos are 1/3 of the population. But kind of working at that work requires that we start not just reinforcing and throwing out these terminologies and discourses that become fashionable even amongst us as activists and as organizers. It's too easy. And so we actually have to push up and start developing new language.
Thank you. Thank you for one more question. Thank you. One more question. Who's got a pressing? Oh yeah, I see a waiver. Yeah. Hi. Yeah. Oh, sorry. There's confusing.
It's so hard to see.
Sorry. Maybe we'll just hear them both and then we'll answer what we can from them both.
Okay. Do you want to go first? Do you want me to?
Sure, I can go first. About to be a graduate student, leaving academia with high hopes of like performing and doing creative things. I want to know what your support system looks like within it, financially as well as like emotionally, spiritually, and whatnot.
Yes, that's good.
What does it look like to be an artist and financially, spiritually, emotionally support? Thank you. Next.
Yeah, so first of all, thank you all so much. I think collectively you folks are like a powerhouse mosaic of badasses, and I'm so honored to like share space with y'all. And the question is really about the concept of this, this gathering about performing new worlds. And I'm totally a deep believer in culture jamming. And like, I was really struck by what you said in particular, Francesca, about how we need to shift media culture to like actually activate in the real world instead of just being, like the analysis is so important. I think now in a political climate where there are folks that need to have the politicization to understand what's going on in our world, as well as plugging into tangible campaigns to make sure that we move things forward, because many hands make for light work, and there's so much localized struggles here in Detroit as well as across the country and world. And it's so important now, global solidarity and like how the struggles are interconnected is so important. And my question is to your, in all of your opinions, what does it look like to create like a resilient, nimble media network in the face of net neutrality, in the face of these oppressive systems that like these mediums have activated in so many ways, global connection and like fights to be able to channel together, but how do we build a resilient media network of folks that are using culture to try and reflect the world that we want to see, and do so in a way that also avoids all of these intrusions by these like mega, you know, corporate, whatever, you know what I'm saying.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the questions. We're a little pressed for time, so we're gonna just have a quick 30-second answers to both of those from each of our full 30-second full of answers from everybody.
So I'll just start, and probably will be insufficiently answer both of them. So cool. Thank you. But I think absolutely net neutrality I didn't mention, but it is going to simultaneously create new spaces. I don't mean that I mean that in a like a Hulu, like Amazon way, like the gross way, new spaces. So there's gonna be new places to like pitch and have like alternative stories and our more radical ideas out there, but at the same time it's gonna make it very narrow as well. And so I think nothing can substitute for being in spaces together and having actually like live stand-up shows, burlesque shows, etc. At the same time, I want to see that the YouTube of progressive voices, like where, when are we going to make our own media, and actually in terms of an infrastructure. And I think, again, we have yet to see that, and I think we can.
Thank you. Yes. Talk to Francesca about infrastructure.
Yeah.
I'll answer the first question briefly. So I think I heard you say that you wanted to start your art practice, and that you were trying to figure out how to have support and what does finances look like and all that. My finances suck, but I never let that stop me from making artwork, So I literally I've only gotten 5 grants, all shitty, all under $5,000, and I've been making work for 15 years. And I never let money stop me. I never say, oh, well, I need to get this camera first, and then I need to get that costume first, and then I need to get a rehearsal space. I'm like, fuck it. I'm gonna use my cheap-ass camera. I'm gonna use my kitchen as my rehearsal space. I'm gonna fucking put together whatever the fuck I have at the house, and I'm gonna hit this shit up. Money is not gonna fucking stop me right now. But that doesn't mean, don't ever tell that to a funder. That doesn't mean you shouldn't ask for money for your artwork, and that you're not deserving of it, and that nobody, some projects require more money than other projects, but I think that if you have an artistic practice or you want to move forward into an artistic practice, you just start with what you have and just get started. Just doing a little bit a day, having a practice, like a 2-hour time for you to sit down and try to work things out creatively for yourself is very important, and you can do that anywhere. You can do it in your head. You don't need a studio.
Thank you. Yes.
I'll try and straddle both of these questions relatively quickly. So for the person that was discussing about becoming an artist, I would say one of the reasons why I made Brujos was because the monsters in Brujos, they're not, right? They're actually straight, wealthy white men. The monsters in Supernatural, it's super nurtured. What is supernatural is us people of color, women, queers of color, trans people, the shit that we survive to stay alive, and the stuff that we create under white supremacy and capitalism is nothing less than supernatural. I'm saying that because it's important that you know that you're a part of that genealogy, that is there. And so, and that stuff all is compounded when you're trying to make a life as an artist. And so it is about that radical insistence to create. And it's so hard. I'm always broke, and I'm not even just funding my career. I'm also like supporting my students, and you know, and things like that. And so it's a constant struggle. Welcome to the ride.
Thank you.
But part of what it requires is so often that we engage those systems that are trying to kill us, that we engage, you know, those spaces. And so what it then opens up the possibility for is so often when we talk about radical, we talk about it as an identity and a purity, right? Oh, that's not radical. Fuck it, throw that person out. Oh, that's not radical enough. But I care about radical positionality, right? And I care about radical ethics. So for me, like, we do need to engage the system. The problem is so often when people get included into the system, they throw their radical politics out the door, right? To get more mobility. And so, like, you know, how do we then hold on to that radical positionality? And at the same time is radical imagination, right? Like, actually doing the work to create a new world, to start creating all these alternative ecologies where we support each other in other ways. A quick example before I close is like the Hoodwazi. You know, all the guests and the audience, they've so often collaborated with each other, all sharing resources, spaces, showing up on each other's projects, showing up to each other's protests. So there's other ways to measure survival and value.
Thank you. And I think that we see that's what we see at the AMC every year, and for 20 years, is these cross-pollination, all the projects that have come out since the AMC, and so to how do we survive? Family, friends, community, being with each other, holding, loving each other, giving us space to feel and be, and celebrating each other for all that we do to survive every day and celebrate. And so I would really like to thank Jenny for putting the panel together, and the AMC staff, all of everybody who's made this AMC possible, this amazing panel. Thank you all for being here, and thank you all so much for making this an incredible AMC. Thank you.
I should have had something more than that. Xandra, you're amazing.
Thank you so much.
And the closing ceremonies will happen in mere 5 minutes. So feel free to go to the bathroom and do what you need to do.
Cool. Real quick announcement. If you are in community and know Naomi Flores, if you could please meet the safety team on the outside of the Community Arts Auditorium room, that'd be great. And stay with us. We will get started in just a couple minutes. Thanks.